So 2022 begins and we are all on the precipice of war.
I know, it feels like that, doesn't it?
Are we? This is the strange thing. It's Ukraine. Of course, everyone, we're talking about the
Yes.
Ukraine.
Now I should say,
Yes.
Ukraine, the Ukraine. I think people are dropping the off the front of it.
There's been a lot of talk about pronunciation. I mean, people call it Kyiv, but Kyiv is actually the Russian pronunciation of it.
Yes.
So the Ukrainians don't want it to be Kyiv. So of course I did. I went online and discovered how you say it.
Yes, how?
And it's Kyiv.
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 Oh, okay.
Kyiv. You got to smile when you say Kyiv.
I do have to say that someone on Twitter did comment to me that they were looking forward to our first sojourn back, and they couldn't wait for you to come up with another bad accent. And I said, well, strap yourself in because we're tackling Ukraine.
Don't worry, I have many bagged accents for this. There is so much to talk about. Let's get on with it.
So much. Let's do it. You're listening to I Spy, the unwanted dinner guest of Australian intelligence.
Hello, my name's Vlad. Oh, I like that. I take him. Oh, look at that over there. I own him now. Oh, don't touch that.
Hello and welcome to I Spy by Nez Michelle Stevenson. I'm here with David Callan, and look, it's a new year. It's a new us. Well, we're not so new, but we're back and we're feeling refreshed. We had a bit of a break.
Oh, I had a great break. I had a really good break.
Same. I had a ripper of a break.
I actually lost weight over Christmas.
Oh my God, what did you do?
I just left my watch on the bus.
Oh my God, the dad jokes have not left.
Strap
We
yourselves
still
in.
have them.
You got another year of them.
So anyway, we're going to chat Ukraine because it is definitely something that has been kind of building since the end of December. It's something that probably not many people know a lot about, but we are talking about it more and more in our news cycle.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about, are we having to provide gas supply to Europe just in case Russia decides to
Well,
pull
if
some
that's the
sneaky moves?
case, cha-ching for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. But, this is a very complex situation, and I know that you're probably going to provide some light on it.
I've been wallowing in this
I bet.
right since Christmas.
I bet you have.
As soon as they went, troops are massing on the Russian-Ukraine border, I went, oh, I'm in, right? And
Yeah.
the thing about it is there's a lot of moving parts to it. There's a lot of
100%.
history to it.
Yes. So I think where we should start is, where did it start? Because it was about 8 years ago.
Well, in the 12th...
Oh, you're going to go that far back?
In the 12th century. No, we can.
I'm like, you're going that far back. I was looking around about 8 years ago.
2014.
Yes.
Right, when they came in and when Vladimir went, I really like the look of Crimea. I will take now.
Yes,
right?
yes,
So
yes.
they basically went in and took Crimea.
Right, but they did it for a reason.
Well, they did it because, essentially they wanted Sevastopol because it's a warm water port and they don't have a lot of those. So there was the military aspect, but also they like to think that it was traditionally Russian because Ukraine has got this really strange relationship with Russia in that Vladimir Putin around about June last year, wrote an essay on why the Ukraine belongs to Russia. And it cites a lot of very interesting history. That's why I said back in the 12th century. Because back in the 12th century, the Mongols, at that time they were known as the Golden Horde, took over the Ukraine and sort of dragged Russia into it. But there was the Russians known as the Rus, and the Rus were descended from Vikings. And this is all crazy history and it gets nuts, and somebody else will cover this. But essentially, once the Golden Horde moved out, once the Mongols fell apart, the Russians sort of had their foothold in Kyiv.
Yes.
Right? So they were there. But then what happened was the Ukraine sort of detached itself after the formation of the Soviet Union. It became a separate state, or oblast as they like to call them.
Yeah.
And then it's this weird sort of thing. It all comes down to the river running right down the middle of it.
Yeah.
It's like you've got Eastern Ukraine, which is very Russian, and then you got Western Ukraine, which is more Ukrainian, right? So, and the fact that the Ukrainian language is very much like Russian, but not quite. And the eastern side of the country speaks pretty much Russian, while the western side speaks pretty much Ukrainian. The interesting point is the president of Ukraine, who's a comedian. Don't you love
what?
that?
What
He's
do you
a
mean?
comedian.
No.
Yeah, seriously. He was a comedian, a Ukrainian comedian. Zelensky's his name. He was a Ukrainian comedian, and he was. Now, here's the interesting thing about him. He's a Russian-speaking comedian,
Mm.
and he had a show, a TV show in the Ukraine, where he was a comedian who became the president.
No.
Seriously, I'm not
This is
kidding.
not true.
This is totally true.
Oh my
right?
God, this is so good.
So he had this sitcom about being the president of the Ukraine and how it was hopeless and stupid and ridiculous. And then someone said, "You should run for president," and he did, and he won. Right now, he was a Russian-speaking comedian, and he got most of his money and most of his fame touring Russia.
Right.
But then, of course, he became the Ukrainian president and went, "Oh, gee, I better start actually behaving like a Ukrainian and representing the Ukraine."
Mm.
And essentially what happened was he became all of his public speeches are now done in Ukrainian, though he's a fluent Russian speaker. And the whole thing is, he was not meant to win. He's a kind of Trumpian in the fact that he wasn't meant to win this election. But since he's won it, he's actually sort of like gone, all right, I better learn this job.
So there's been a whole lot of conversation too about how the Kremlin really wanted to put in leaders who were Russian.
Oh, yeah.
Basically.
Now,
and that's where this has kind of fallen apart.
Yeah, because they were going to put in their pro-Russian candidate.
Yes.
Unfortunately, this comedian won.
Yes.
And of course, the Ukraine's been this focus of Russian interference with America and Joe Biden's son and Trump.
Yep.
And there's all of these factors that come into it. The bottom line comes down to this. In the eastern part, the very, very eastern part of the Ukraine, they're very pro-Russian.
Yes.
They believe themselves to be Russian.
They're kind of like separatists. So like
they're separatists.
They're militants who kind of had they fired up about 8 years ago. That's when that kind of all started.
Once the Crimea fell,
yep,
the separatists really lifted their game.
And also from what I read, Gorbachev was kind of good. He really wanted to maintain peace in the region so he was not following the same path that Russia is following today. He was very good at keeping lines of communication open with NATO, was okay with Ukraine being who they were. And then now you've got like this whole different perspective from Russia coming in from Russia.
Well, it's really Vlad.
Yes, absolutely. That's what I mean.
Vlad is very much like, this is ours and we want it. But there are other factors coming in with Vlad in that, one, his polling numbers at home are bad at the moment. They're not good. Right, he's probably only loved by 95% of the population, not 99.
So sad.
Yeah, so he is seriously losing political traction in Russia, and because of that, he's trying to bolster himself. The other thing is NATO. Right. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, NATO gave them a guarantee that, look, we're not going to let everyone join us now. Relax, Russia. It's cool. But then there's been this slow creep forward where Poland are now part of it, Lithuania are now part of it. There's all of these other what Russia would regard as client states, Eastern Bloc countries that are now moving into Europe.
Yep. NATO
did give them a guarantee that, look, we're not going to let people, anyone join holus bolus. But then the Ukraine sort of said, we'd actually like to join NATO.
Yes.
NATO said, well, we'll have a look at that and see how it fits with us.
And then Russia got pissed.
And Russia went, wait a second, the last thing we want is NATO troops right on our doorstep.
Yeah. And then also now we've got Americans kind of supplying Ukraine troops.
Well, here again, this comes down to that really interesting thing of what's literally going on the ground.
Yes.
See, because if you look at a map, you've got the Russians building troops up on the Russian Ukrainian border. But this is a great thing. And again, it comes down, if you listen to our episode on overt intelligence or open source intelligence, I have been sitting around on places like Twitter and also Reddit.
Reddit.
A couple of
You would have gone down a deep, deep rabbit hole on that place.
Oh my God, there is so much porn in there. It's just crazy.
You have not left that fort of yours in a whole month, have you?
I have to buy a fan because it stinks in here.
It's like a teenager's room.
No, it's more old man sweat than anything.
Gross. Now I have a visual. Can we just move on?
I'm not wearing pants right now.
Oh my God, just move on, move on, move on.
So anyway, the interesting thing is there is a thread on Twitter called tank porn, and no, it's not what you think.
Okay.
It's not people in water tanks nude. It's all just photos of armored vehicles. And somebody said, interesting. This is a tank from the Pacific 155th Naval Infantry Unit, so Marines, right? So, and it was a picture of a tank, the side of the tank, but where the number or the markings that would tell you who owns that tank is, there is essentially a white patch.
Right.
They've just painted over it or stuck a piece of paper over it, and then it's driving through Belarus.
Right.
So what they've done is they've picked up the 155th Marine Unit, so the Russian Navy infantry and armor. They put them on the Trans-Siberian Railway and punched them across the entire continent, the Eurasian continent, to drop them in Belarus. So these guys are sitting in Belarus. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, Belarus sits directly above the Ukraine. And is probably within spitting distance of Kyiv.
Well, they're also talking about how, the portion of Ukraine that is kind of separatist, that Russia has troops embedded in there as well.
Oh, with the little green man.
Yes.
Now, that's been going on again since 2014.
Yes.
Anything from Spetsnaz to just willing volunteers, guys that are being sent in with Russian equipment and with Russian uniforms, but no markings on them. So they're acting as separatist units. Now, the interesting thing about that is, again, open source intelligence showed us that when the MH17, the Malaysian Airlines flight that was shot down, a lot of people were saying, the Russians were saying, it was obviously the Ukrainians using Stinger missiles. A Stinger missile can't hit something that high.
No.
Right? An airliner sits at about a mile above the surface of the Earth, so you're not going to hit it with a Stinger missile. But it was open source intelligence that had the BUK truck going into Ukraine, into that area where it was fired, and then open source intelligence showing us that it was going out.
Yep.
Right. So there's a lot of stuff going on that's coming through social media where people are posting pictures of activity in the area. The big question is, are we going to have a war?
Right. And so from what I have read, it seems like both sides are at a stalemate. They're just kind of hanging out. So you've got NATO and you've got the Americans. You've got the Americans and the French who are now getting involved. So the Americans are talking to the Ukrainians and the French are talking to the Russians.
Yep.
And so they're trying to sort this out.
Now, the Americans and the Russians and the French and NATO all had a meeting in Geneva about a week and a half ago. And, of course, nothing came through.
No. Yeah.
And now the Russians made their demands, and one of the big demands that they've made is Ukraine will never, ever be a member of NATO, to which the Americans went, yeah, no, we're not going to give you that one. Yeah. So there's a series of demands that the Russians have made, and the Americans and the Russians insisted they got an answer in writing, which arrived in Russia on Thursday.
Yep.
And we don't know the details, but definitely what was said was, no, these demands don't work. We've given you a few demands. Now, interestingly enough, the Russians have said, well, we're not going to talk about this for 2 weeks. We're going to just they've gone back to the 2014 ceasefire and gone, we're going to sit down and think about this.
Yes. So what's interesting, we should talk about the ceasefire as well. So the ceasefire is this big convoluted piece of paper, I guess. And the Russians have kind of said, we don't adhere to this ceasefire because it doesn't really involve us, I think, is kind of the gist of it. It's really interesting. But then I was trying to understand it, but this ceasefire is actually very, very convoluted and confusing.
Oh, yeah, well, totally. But the whole thing is one idea of it is the Russians are like going, ceasefire, good idea. We definitely should have a ceasefire. 2 weeks, that's probably a really good idea. The thing about that is that gives them time to build up more material in the area. And also they have one major problem going into eastern Ukraine. It's really flat.
You're right.
And really wet.
Right.
So armour has a really hard problem moving through swamps. And it is. It's very swampy, very wet. But in 2 weeks' time, when the big winter freeze hits, if they get a big winter freeze in the next 2 to 3 weeks, suddenly your tanks, your armour can move across that land a lot faster. But do they want to go to war? What's interesting is America is saying this is going to happen. Britain is saying this is going to happen. NATO is saying this is going to happen. Russia is saying this isn't going to happen, and the Ukraine is saying this isn't going to happen.
Right.
Someone actually asked Zelensky what he thought, and he basically turned around and said, "We've been living with this for 8 years. This has been going on for 8 years. They parked their troops there, they'd move them away. They move them in, they move them out." I personally think this is Vladimir Putin, one, trying to build up support at home. I also think that he's looking to be given a few bits. He's waiting to be appeased by, all right, keep Donetsk and we won't worry about the Crimean, and take the land in between, which will give them Mariupol, which is another warm water port that they want.
Yeah.
So there is the idea that he wants concessions, and he's hoping that by just overloading the border with troops, he will get the concessions. Because there's one thing, if he does go across the border, he can win Ukraine in 60 days if he wants it.
Right. But what's been happening too during this whole time is that the US have been supplying Ukraine with arms.
Well, everyone has, except one country, which is really important to think about, which is Germany.
Right. Germany's like, we will not be part of any more wars.
We have nothing to do with this at all. We're staying away.
Because we learnt.
Yeah, we learned the hard way. We're not going over there. It's terrible. To the point, though, that Lithuania were going to send weapons into the Ukraine, but they were German-bought weapons. And the Germans turned around and went, no, you will not be, nein, not them, not our guns, no way. Right? So the Germans are basically standing back. Now, there's a reason for this. We have a new chancellor because Angela Merkel.
That's right.
Merkel, God damn, we really need her right now, because she was the one who just walked up to Vladimir and went, no, put the gun down.
Well, she's a hard ass. She's great. You couldn't not listen to her.
No. A chemical professor going, look, you're just going to have to listen to me, and we're not doing anything until I say we go. Right. So Macron, who's now basically inherited her position as the leader of Europe at the moment, he's sort of like going, well, okay, I've got to sort of stake my claim. And meanwhile, I think is it Kohl or Koch? The new chancellor, he's basically going, I'm just going to stand back and not get involved here.
Yeah.
But what people don't seem to realize is, yes, there's a lot of stuff going on around the Ukrainian-Russian border. The Russians are really active in a lot of other places. They just had a naval exercise with the Chinese in the Arabian Gulf.
So there's a lot of conversations about the Chinese and the Russians at the moment, and how close that they are getting.
Oh, yeah.
So I do think we're not on the precipice, but we're building towards a big global shift in power.
Most definitely.
That's the way it feels.
Totally agree with that. And the Russians are really rattling their saber hard. There was, interestingly enough, someone, again, I can't remember, and I will thank you online, someone sent to our Twitter account at iSpy Podcast, sent a little article about how the Russians are now having live fire submarine exercises off the coast of Ireland.
Great.
Oh, fiddly-dee potatoes, what are the Russians doing over there?
You know what? I just feel like we've hit the trifecta of accents. This is the ep for you to just bring it all out. We haven't done Macron yet. That's the only thing.
Yeah, that is true. I have not done him yet, but why should I? I don't think I know. I'm really disappointed we don't have a South African player in this, because I love doing a South African accent. They're really nice. I really like doing them. But getting back to the issue at hand.
Yes, I digress.
Yes, we've digressed into accent land.
Yep.
Because the Chinese foreign minister just recently got up and said, look, can we all just back off this Cold War mentality? Also, I loved it. He made this big comment about, look, we've got to calm down, settle down. The Ukraine is a problem that's not going away, but, rattling our sabers isn't going to help. And by the way, America, leave our Olympics alone, because Beijing do not want anything to happen right now.
I know.
Because they're about to have the Winter Olympics, and that's a lot of money for their broadcast services.
Yeah, but I hate to break it to them, COVID's happening. They're trying so hard for it not to happen, but already a German team member has COVID. So I think it's a deck of cards at the moment.
Oh, look, COVID is as we said in our last intro, it is the the massive cock block of the universe
Yes,
at the moment.
but also
it stops everything.
But when you're chasing zero COVID policy like the Chinese have, then it's really not going to bode well for them. Anyway, I digress again.
Looking for a new career? Welcome to Do HVAC Training Service Center in North Charleston. Enroll today in our comprehensive HVAC training hands-on field experience-based program, covering troubleshooting, maintenance, installation, and more on various HVAC systems and ductwork. We offer EPA and NATE preparation and testing, along with various certifications. Enjoy payment options. Achieve certification in under 5 months. Enroll now for your new journey of skill development and career advancement. Log on to dewhvactrainingsc.com to inquire.
So we've got Ukraine, Russia, China. What the fuck?
Yeah. Now, you've got America. Now, I also think this is a chance for Vladimir Putin to just test Joe Biden's resolve.
Yes.
He's got a lot of issues he's dealing with at home. There's a lot of domestic problems going on there. He can't get his legislation through Congress, and he's being blocked by his own party.
Well,
There's
that's because Joe Manchin is a fuckwit. Like, oh my God. Imagine being a Democrat and having someone who is actually more Republican, but in your party. That is Joe Manchin.
Yeah. It's a bit like he's the George Christensen of American politics.
Gosh. It's just insane. Yes.
Oh, actually, he's more the Mark Latham of politics. But anyway, the whole thing is with Joe Biden's got to act tough. He's got to play the tough man. And that's understandable. That's his job right now. Biden also has to find himself a new Supreme Court justice.
Which is good. He has promised to install a black person.
I think that's great.
Yes.
And a black female, by the way.
Yes.
007.
I was going to say James Bond.
Get her in. She's great.
Yeah.
Now, the thing with it all going on is everything's in a state of flux. The planet is currently, we're still dealing with a pandemic. And this is the perfect time to, ante up and see what we've got. So I think the interesting thing about it is a lot of people have said that if Russia goes into the Ukraine, there's really not a lot anyone can do about it.
No, and Ukraine will fall.
A lot of people think that they're only going to go as far as the Donetsk, which is the river right down the middle.
Right.
So they'll take over the eastern side, leave the western side till later. Essentially, Russia need their buffer. They want their buffer zone between Europe and themselves.
But at what point, let me ask you this, at what point does the rest of the world step in, or do they just watch this happen? Because we have seen examples of NATO and the Americans getting involved when Russia has flexed its power, and it doesn't always work out so well.
Well, let's have a look at the Crimea.
Yes.
They went, we'll put sanctions on it. Now, interestingly enough, the Americans have said, we're going to put personal sanctions on Vladimir Putin if this goes ahead. If he invades, we're going to hit him. Not just Russia, we're going to hit him.
Yep.
The great point is most Russian commentators have said it's a pointless exercise because no one knows where his stuff is.
Right.
A lot of it is being held by proxy.
Yeah.
And most of it is in Russia anywhere. He's not overseas. It's mostly in Russia.
So, yeah, of course. He's buried it deep somewhere. No one can touch it.
Yeah. Now, they'd be much better off if what they did was go, let's hit all the oligarchs. Let's just hit everyone under him because they do have stuff overseas and a lot of their money is probably his. In fact, one of the theories is this has really boiled up big time because the Ukrainians arrested an oligarch in the Ukraine who is very pro-Russia. What was his name? Medvedchuk. Who is also a very close personal friend of Vladimir Putin. But they've arrested this guy and imprisoned him for corruption. And that's basically made Putin go, oh, hang on a minute, he's a buddy of mine. And possibly he's gone, hang on a minute, that guy has half of my cash and you've just locked it up. Yeah. So at the moment, there are so many variables in what's going on here.
So if the Russians do flex their muscle, what are we going to do? What's the rest of the world going to do? And what should we do?
Right. First and foremost, if he wants to flex his muscles, he's got to get in there. He's got to have a reason to go in. He needs a casus belli to go in. And interestingly enough, when he took over, when they had the war with Chechnya, when Chechnya became independent, they, as a pretext to go in and take control, apartment blocks were being blown up in Moscow. Right.
Yes.
People were blowing up apartment blocks and they were blaming the Chechens.
No, but it was him.
FSB officers were caught putting explosives in an apartment block, and when they were asked what they were doing, they said, we're doing this as an exercise to make sure we know what to do. But it was like, hang on, they're real explosives.
They
you're
were
using.
blowing themselves up just to give them
Yeah.
an excuse to go
Right.
in.
Now, the other thing that he did when he went in was they used a very, very solid cyber warfare program on it, right? So they shut down the power grid, they shut down the telecommunications grid, they shut down pretty much the electronic side of Chechnya.
Yes. So that's what they're saying that they're doing right now with Ukraine. Their cyber attacks are just insane. They're just
and
hammering
we're involved
them.
now. Yeah, Australia is now doing its part. So that would involve ASIO, that would probably involve Signals Directorate. Our cyber warfare guys are working with their cyber warfare guys because our guys are beginning to learn how to do this quite well.
Yeah.
We're getting very good at it, which is, for me, I think, yes, we've got an intelligence export, which is great. But the interesting thing is the other reason why Germany is very reticent to get involved in this is, Vladimir can turn around and go, oh, you want to get involved? He'll just switch off the gas.
Yes.
Because they get most of their energy out of Russia.
I know. And this has always been a thing that they've threatened countries with, switching off the gas, because especially in the middle of winter, they've done it in the middle of winter and, people have just literally frozen to death.
Now, for the pretext to go in, there are already a few that are beginning to come up. One thing that Vladimir Putin has said regularly. Now, interestingly enough, he has not said anything since before Christmas about
he's had someone else speak. He's had someone else speak for him.
Yeah, his foreign minister has done all the speaking.
Yep.
In fact, he was asked a question about it, and he just sort of like raised his eyebrows and walked away.
Yep.
He's playing this to the hilt. But what's coming out of the Russian media is there's stories about how there are massacres going on around Donbass and Donetsk and all these areas. There's all of these massacres, and Russian-speaking Ukrainians are being killed. And why aren't people doing anything about, as they've described it, this genocide?
Right.
So they are looking. You could imagine a scenario where they might have an artillery unit that's gone forward of the lines and fired back.
Yep.
Towards a Russian-speaking village in East Ukraine, and the Russians go, right, that's it, we're going in. Right?
Yep.
And if they go in, they're going to come up through the Crimean, they're going to come across from Russia, and they're going to drop down from Belarus. It's a massive pincer movement that no one's going to be able to stop. So what are we going to do? We're going to watch.
Okay.
I think that's really
yeah, I think that's pretty much what we need to be doing.
Yeah. The interesting thing about it was that someone said, well, the CIA would definitely have some sort of insurgency program going on in there. But when you look at CIA insurgency programs, they haven't been all that successful lately. The Afghanistan insurgency program actually backfired.
Yes.
Like the Americans are sending Stinger missiles, which are very effective against helicopters, but hopeless against drones or, say, a fighter jet or a bomber. And everyone said that the Stinger missiles were the things that actually kicked the Soviets out of Afghanistan back in the 90s. Well, actually, that's not true. The Stinger missiles were only put into Afghanistan a month and a half before the Soviets pulled out, which wouldn't make any difference anyway. It wouldn't have made that much difference to that to the combat scenario. So people are saying, well, the Stinger missile thing has been a bit sort of overblown. The big issue is they simply do not have enough troops available to go in and resist. And if the CIA think they're going to get away with doing insurgency programs, and I can guarantee you they're already there and they're already working.
Right. But we all know how that goes. I mean, Osama bin Laden.
Yeah.
It's like it doesn't really work. I think America needs to kind of realize at some point that they don't always work.
No. They don't. Well, they very regularly do, or they very rarely do.
I know, exactly. So I think maybe we just need to sit back and watch this one unfold and see how it plays out instead of getting all up in their grill. Because Russia, I think, is not someone we want to be flexing too hard against at the moment.
In this card game, they've got 4 aces and the Joker, and we've got the little card that says these cards are coated with a protective lining. So we are in. This is an intractable problem, and Vladimir holds the cards.
100%.
Yeah. So look, this is, and let us put a disclaimer on this right now. by the time this episode comes out,
Yeah.
the entire situation could have changed.
I know. Imagine, like, by the time this comes out, there's like World War III, and we just totally missed calling that.
I'm staying in a blanket because it's bomb-proof. I did a few extensions over the break.
Oh, great. So now you're in a bomb-proof shelter.
I'm in a bomb-proof blanket box. Now, the thing is, that could happen. We could be in, like, there could be an armed conflict going on in Europe. The other thing is, Vladimir could have, the Americans could turn around on the weekend and go, oh, yeah, well, look, let's just have East Ukraine. The Ukrainians just relax. Everyone chill out.
Which is more likely to happen. That's what I think.
You reckon it's going to be appeasement?
Look, I think the Russians are going to move in. I think they'll probably take half of Ukraine.
I reckon they're going to move in. Yeah, I think they've got an unwanted house guest for the foreseeable future.
That's what I would say as well.
Yeah, I've got that. They're called teenage children.
Or you are the unwanted house guest.
That's why my wife won't let me sleep with her anymore.
David Callan, the unwanted house guest of I Spied.
Well, I think we've wrapped that. I think we've tidied that one up. Of course, if you have any comments about this, please get in touch with us at I Spied Podcast on Twitter because Michelle doesn't, but I really like talking to you all.
I know, because you have no friends, mate.
I know. Oh, I forgot.
Oh.
Just a quick call
Salty?
out to the Salty Sea
I
Dog.
know.
We finally got to have a beer.
Great. How did that go?
In the words of Homer, clean clothes, nice smell, class act, all the way.
Okay. All right. So first date went well.
It was very nice. I think we might get a second.
Oh, my gosh. Let's leave it there.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay.